This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 5th of December 2023 at home in Wicklow. And in it, I have further thoughts on the conflict in the Middle East. Some of those thoughts are a direct response to a good friend and listener who reached out to me with a bit of concern about some of my my previous reactions to the conflict. That was a nice stepping off point for me just to think a bit deeper about it. So I share that. I also discuss the death of Shane MacGowan and Henry Kissinger, and share thoughts on their respective lives and their impact in their respective areas. And I conclude today's episode with a couple of movie reviews, a couple of nice, nasty, but in one case anyway, very funny movies I just took in the last couple of weeks. So I hope you have time to listen to that. That's it. You will notice in the background some chicken noises and maybe a dog noise, because I recorded the episode in a different room, so slightly different sound quality and some environmental interruptions. So I hope that doesn't detract from your enjoyment of the episode. Okay, I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my emoji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. I hope this finds you well, and I'd like to thank you first and foremost for choosing this podcast and this episode of this podcast. I'm very happy to have your company, so to speak, because obviously when I'm recording there ain't nobody here but me and the chickens and the cats and the dog. And in fact today I'm not recording in my normal space. I've ceded occupation of the green room at home to my wife, who's not usually here on the days I record. So she's in that room doing her whatever she does, the mysterious ways of women. No, I don't mean that. She has a training going on Zoom. So I'm in a different room. The acoustic, the audio properties of this episode may sound a little bit different to usual, but immediately to my left I have a geriatric cat face down on a cushion on the chair beside me. That would be Marlon, 21 years old. Across the room from me, curled up in a ball, is Ruby, the tabby. I always refer to her as a kitten, but she's over 2 years old now, so she's not really a kitten anymore. In fact, she has grown. She's really looking like a proper grown-up cat. And then to my right, on the other sofa, couch, settee, is Pepper, the collie, also curled up in a ball, asleep. She had a visit to the vet this morning, so she's pretty pooped. So there you go. And the chickens, those bloody chickens, I can see them from where I sit. They are currently eating birdseed that I left out for the birds that come into the garden. Chickens. They're not really endearing themselves to me. This is the second squad of chickens that we've had. There was a change of regime over the summer. Edwina the rooster was dispatched to the chicken coop in the sky. We have kept Charlotte and Bobo, and we have some of their offspring. So we have Uno, which is Bobo's son. So he's quite an aggressive young rooster. I'm not sure how much longer he is for this world. And then we have the three new chickens. I may have referred to these guys recently. So the three new Charlotte's other chickens are, let me get this right. We have Bluey, and we have, Bluey, named for the very popular Australian cartoon dog. We were early adapters of Bluey before we came back from Australia. We were big fans. I've just gone blank on the other chicken's name. One of them is called Bob Ross, I know that much. And then there's another one. Or is it just the three of them? Maybe it's just the three of them. That's it. So Uno, Bluey, and Bob Ross. And then Charlotte and Bobo are the mothers. Yeah, 5 in total. Anyway, there you go. So it's all happening here on the Clear Out Menagerie. Okay, quite a bit to get through today, and a little bit of a potpourri of different constituent parts. A couple of movies I want to talk about, not Christmas ones. This is not a Christmas episode. I hinted it might be, but it won't be. I'm not sure. I just haven't. I haven't come up with sufficient themes or ideas or inspiration for a Christmas episode just yet. I still plan to do the normal Christmas special, which will consist of a new story and some songs, some music of the season, perhaps another interview with my daughter. That was quite popular last year. She's definitely having a moment. She's having one of those Santa Claus isn't real moments, and it's driving her demented. She hates the prospect of him not being real, and we're doing what we can to allay her fears. But that's I guess it's not a key moment for everyone. Not everyone's into Christmas and Santa Claus, but like a lot of kids are in the world, and that is definitely a point of departure as a young person when you're like, that guy they told us about who informed the season with such extraordinary magic is actually a load of crap. Is actually not real at all. Oh God. And I've been speaking sort of slightly ambiguously and abstractly to my daughter, going, listen, there are different paths you can go down in life, and one of those paths, you believe in magic and you believe in something special in the world, and that keeps a little bit of hope alive, and it keeps a little bit of idealism alive, and it keeps the light alive. And I said, I'm nearly 50 and I believe in it. And then there's the other path where you just go, nah, there's nothing to look forward to. It's all, so I'm giving her a real kind of zero sum game. It's a total binary. Everything is magical and wonderful and amazing, or everything is in the crapper. So anyway, I'm plotting and scheming because she's got her super sleuth hat on to try and prove herself. She wants to prove herself wrong. Her instinct is that he's not real, and she wants him very much to be real, and that is her dilemma, and it is distressing her no end. But what can you do? We'll see. I'll report back. I will report back. And hopefully she doesn't listen to this episode. She won't. She has no interest. She has no interest whatsoever. Anyway. So, a couple of movie reviews and a couple of obituaries. That's right. A couple of significant figures passed away this week. And the level of significance or importance or resonance you felt upon hearing the news of these deaths will be largely subjective. And interesting though, I think interesting to talk about. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about, in fact, you know what, I'm just going to start with this, and maybe that will be a thread that will weave through the rest of the episode. I had a friend reach out to me, a regular listener from Melbourne, my good friend Jo, a woman I worked with when I was teaching in Melbourne. We spent a short time working together, about 10 years ago now, and she used to tease me because I was down the other end of the corridor, but she would be able to hear my lesson in great detail. Such was the volume of my voice, and she used to give me a bit of friendly grief about that. in any case, Jo reached out to me, and she was responding to some of my kind of commentary / reaction assessment of the current conflict in Gaza. And she felt I had been a little bit one-sided in my analysis. And Jo comes from a Jewish background, and is kind of struggling with, I suppose, what can be seen as a very certainly an anti-Israel position from different parts of the world and among her own kind of group of pals, and just sort of an absence, what she feels is a bit of an absence of nuance, and maybe a hesitancy to condemn the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. And certainly I'd have to put my hand up and go, I did focus, in the couple of episodes I spoke about the conflict, I did focus very much on Israel's role and Israel as an instrument of imperialism. And I feel I brought a certain amount of nuance to that analysis, or that, my own thoughts on that. But without even having listened back, I think I can say pretty safely that I didn't particularly, I'm not sure how condemnatory I was of the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. And that was an omission and a failing on my part, because you only have to spend a moment or two taking in what happened on that day and listen to certain accounts or stories or reports of the horrific violence that those members of Hamas carried out in kibbutzes and around that part of southern Israel, to just be disgusted. And ultimately, so let me just say unequivocally, I condemn that. Absolutely. I condemn it. Absolutely. There's no part of me that's like, but what I realised as I was reflecting on this, and I'd been thinking of a very much a related matter even before Jo had reached out to me, because I was just, looking at the sort of escalating death toll in Gaza, and I just found myself going, it's just this form of madness from either side. When you've got, if it's not a misrepresentation to describe members of Hamas as jihadists, and to equate them then with the hyper aggression of the Israeli military response, for me there is an equivalency there, because there is such an extraordinary disregard for human life, an astonishing disregard for human life, and from either side to view their enemy and without hesitation to go, it's okay for us to wipe you out, whether that's Hamas viewing Israelis or Jews in Israel, or whether it's members of the Netanyahu regime viewing Palestine, Gaza in the same way, and going, there's nothing to stop us doing this. There's no moral compunction that says we shouldn't do this. And I just, there's no value in that for me. And it's I suppose fundamentally it's a pacifist position. It's a non-violent position. And I'd have strong feelings about, imperialism. I have strong feelings about British imperialism, American imperialism, and Israel as a sort of a tool of American imperialism, arguably. But as I spoke about previously, I also am always interested in starting points. I spoke a few episodes ago about the idea of the originating wound, and ultimately, my instincts as a person, from a very young age, it's classic middle child. I'm a real sort of bridge builder. I'm interested in peace. I'm interested in, come on, can we not just sort this out Is there not a way to ameliorate this situation? Can we not take the higher ground and be better people and think of, long-term future healing rather than focus on long-term past hatred or past resentment or past victimhood or, whatever it might be. And I think it's ultimately that's the sign of sort of maturation, when you can really live your sense of forgiveness. And obviously there's no sign of that at the moment. In Gaza, Palestine, Israel, in that conflict. But you'd wonder how long it's going to take before in the future you'll have veterans of these conflicts who can sit down together and break bread and go, that was a crazy time. That was, we really hurt each other. And I'm not sure. I don't have a sufficient grasp of geopolitics. I don't have a sufficient grasp of the nuances of the political situation in that region. Although I certainly was helped by Sam Harris had a very good episode recently where he interviewed an Israeli academic whose name I have not recorded, Yuval Harari something. Yuval Noah Harari? Oh, I apologize. But that was really interesting because the academic in question was able to kind of shed a lot more light on and nuance on the situation, and he made it very clear that Netanyahu is very hawkish and sort of would have probably on a level delighted in the opportunity presented to him to retaliate as a response to the how bad that October 7th attack was. And he said that Netanyahu deliberately has courted this relationship with Hamas because he knows that Hamas will never compromise. And that plays into Netanyahu's vision and sort of strong arm tendencies. So it absolutely suited him. But yeah, ultimately, if you've got a conflict where the combatants on both sides see no value in the lives of their enemies, it can only really go one way. And that way is the loss of compassion, the death of compassion, the death of care for your fellow human, your fellow traveller. And it does what I found myself thinking about in the broader sort of existential consideration is, what value does any human life have? And that may seem a grossly insensitive question to ponder when people are dying in such huge numbers in Gaza at the moment, when people in Israel are mourning the death of those who died in this October 7th attacks, when there are people who've been dying for the last couple of years in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. But I think it's a valid question. And how much of our sense of the value of a human life is caught up in what? In constructed ideas around morality, ideas around the sort of supremacy of the human animal. I'm very wary of that one. I'm not sure. And maybe the question. I'm not sure if the question is another one connected to where our humanity is located, or simply why are we so special? Because we don't generally afford the same value or sanctity of life to other animals, in the world. And my life isn't worth more than anybody else's life. My daughter's life isn't worth more than anybody else's life. I mean, that's always my instinctive position, is that no one's life is worth less than ours. Less than mine, less than my daughter's, less than my wife's. And the second you start thinking the opposite of that, there's a loss somewhere. There's a cost, I think, to your humanity, if your idea of humanity is connected to a sense of broader sort of care or consideration for the other people that we share this planet with. And that might be a very romantic idea. It might be absolutely unrealistic. But, and don't get me wrong, I mean, obviously, I would, I'd choose my daughter over anybody else. But that doesn't mean her life is worth more. It's worth more to me because of my relationship to her. And that then tells me that relationships are important, and building and maintaining good relationships, loving relationships that increase your sense of care for others and increase your sense of being cared for by others. That's a human commodity that I care about. Not everybody does, and not everybody has to. But the question is, can we make how can that be encouraged? And I was going to say, how can that be encouraged in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Israel? How can that be encouraged in Ukraine, Russia, any areas of conflict? How can that be encouraged in Northern Ireland historically? Relations between Northern Irish Unionists and Republicans, nationalists, Catholic communities, Protestant communities, loyalist communities. I did see an interesting headline in that area, which I'll comment on in a second. But the violence has to stop. The guns have to be put down. And there has to be a determination to find a peaceful way forward, a non-violent way forward. And maybe it'll take an atrocity like October the 7th, and maybe it'll take an atrocity / potential genocide that's been playing out since October 7th in Gaza. Maybe it'll take these horrible events to persuade those who yearn for peace to become more determined, more willful, more resolved to achieve that for their, the people of their respective lands and cultures and loyalties. I don't know, but it's tricky, and all of this is in a way just trying to offer an apology to my friend Joe for my oversight, and to further sort of expand on my thoughts, and hopefully that's of interest to anyone else who's listening. I did notice the other day, maybe like yesterday, I saw something in the paper. There was an article, I think, in the Irish Times saying that if Ireland unifies, as in if Northern Ireland, the border is dissolved and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland become part of the nation of Ireland, in the north, that will mean for citizens of Northern Ireland a personal financial loss of approximately 3,500. I think, was it sterling? No, I don't know if that was sterling or euros, but 3,500 a year. And a large percentage of people in Northern Ireland were, it's not worth it. Unification isn't worth 3,500 each. Kind of interesting, no? I think it's interesting that if that's the obstacle to unification, if that's the obstacle to a whole island, Ireland, that's that's not particularly ideological, is it? That's not. I'll never open a border to Republicans from the south of Ireland, from the Republic. I'll never let go of this enmity and hatred I feel for the Irish, Irish culture and Irish republicanism and Irish nationalism. When it comes down to a few quid, it feels like that's progress. And I'd be thinking, take the 3.5 grand. Let's make this a whole island again. I would very much welcome that. But I guess it's not going to cost me 3.5 grand. I mean, yeah, anyway. Okay, so look, they were my thoughts, and I'll move on now. And maybe the connective thread here is the value of human life. Okay, maybe that's the connective tissue in the episode today, like the value of human life. And why don't I just jump straight to the obituaries I referred to earlier. So 2 figures died this week, 2 men. One was the Irishman Shane MacGowan, former lead singer of the Pogues, a man who'd been dogged with health issues and substance abuse related health issues, I would say, from a very hedonistic life. He died at the age of 65 last week, and there's been a tremendous outpouring of grief, of love, admiration, of memories, of salutations, of admiration for his skills as a songwriter. And for me, I was never a huge fan of his band, the Pogues, which were fundamentally a collective of sort of second generation Irish people who came up in the sort of the punk aesthetic of the late 70s, early 80s, and they found this sort of meld of traditional Irish music with punk attitude, and then the sort of probably the distinguishing characteristic of their songs was the brilliance of MacGowan's songwriting, and his kind of completely uncaring frontman punk attitude, where he was just doing his own thing, and if you didn't like it, you knew where you could go. The kind of the Pogues musical aesthetic wasn't one that ever particularly resonated with me, although I did have one of their albums, Rum, Sodomy and the Lash, and from that album, funnily enough, it was a couple of covers that I always liked from that album. A Man You Don't Meet Every Day, a traditional Irish one, and then the great Eric Bogle composition, his anti-war song, and the band played Waltzing Matilda, and I used to love Shane MacGowan's vocal on that song. Now his, there were other songs, probably Rainy Night in Soho, and the other one I've just gone blank on. Was it about Brown Eyes? Have I got that wrong? Again, I was not a fan. I wasn't like a super fan. I always thought that guy's a great songwriter, but there was, the lifestyle and the kind of, I suppose, the way his drunkenness and his relationship to drugs and alcohol, the way that was often, valorized or celebrated or romanticized. I've no time for that. I don't care for it. I mean, it's a very Irish tendency. It's a very, that runs deep in Irish culture, and to voice an opinion that runs counter to that is it's not that popular, and probably feels a bit mean-spirited on a level. But that's how I feel. I kind of go, maybe there's a time and a place where you can kind of be more generous in your attitude to that when people are, younger and don't know any better or have less to lose. But I just think it's very boring. I think it's a very one-note appreciation, and I think it's a little bit misplaced and wrong-headed, and but really undercuts and diminishes the seriousness of addiction and the seriousness of alcoholism, and completely glosses over the horrendous damage, the horrendous cost of addiction and alcoholism. But the way drinking continues to be fetishized in Irish culture is like it's kind of an indictment of a certain willful immaturity. And I say that knowing that for the 10 years I spent in Australia, I found Australians very, very much able to, keep up with the Irish in terms of drinking. But, saying that, there's an aspect to that culture. There's an aspect to the Irish ability to party and to have a laugh and to let go of the daily crap and the stress and really just cut loose. I missed that, and I do value that. Now there's not a direct equivalency with drinking and alcoholism there, but being able to just go, let's just really, drop the other shoe and go for it. I drink occasionally myself. I drink a little regularly, and then occasionally drink a bit more. But I have to be in very particular company to really relax and get myself drunk. It doesn't happen very often at all. And that, of course, is, that's connected to my own desire to maintain control. And it's my nose or my radar for potential conflict or tension with those I'm, in whose company I find myself, and just not wanting to present the opportunity. And that's fine. I'm very comfortable with that. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. And it can come at a cost. There are some accomplished drinkers in my family. That's it. That's a nice euphemism, isn't it? But it comes at a cost. But I acknowledge the value of making the decisions I've made, and I acknowledge the cost, and that that's something I live with, and it's something I may regret, in the future as I get older. But it's been the pattern for a long time now, and I feel it on balance, it has served me. More often it has served me well than not. But Shane MacGowan, I never ever doubted for a second his authenticity. I never felt he was putting on an act or putting on a show. I never felt he was trading in any sort of faux Irishness. I mean, he was born in Tipperary, rural Tipperary, and moved to England as a kid. And he obviously felt a very strong connection to Irish music and Irish storytelling in song, is how I would put it, from a very young age. And I think his songs reflect that. And I think, anything he's written stands up, because I think he really was a very gifted storyteller and songwriter. And the somewhat maligned Fairytale of New York is one of my favourite songs, full stop, never mind one of my favourite songs of his. And it's played to death over here every Christmas, and maybe in other parts of the world as well. And in recent times, it's found itself in the crosshairs of woke politics and the culture wars because of its use of the derogatory homophobic epitaph faggot, because that's the word used by one of the two characters in the song. The song was originally sung by MacGowan and Kirsty MacColl, the late Kirsty MacColl. And it's a duet by two sort of revelers / drunks in New York on Christmas Eve. And it's one of the great migrant songs. And of course, it's a very particular expression of the Irish emigrant experience and being away from home at Christmas. And any Irish person who's been away from home at Christmas, and I did 10 of those Christmases away from home, and a few more in England back in the day. There's a very particular poignancy, and there's a very particular sentimentality that can be overpowering, and a yearning for the sort of embrace of home, the yearning to be immersed in the kind of the milieu, the comfort, the sounds, the smells, the music, the crack. And again, for non-Irish listeners, that's C-R-A-I-C. Crack being an Irish word for fun, for merriment, for kind of a combined idea of fun, merriment, mischief, jollity, lively spirits. All of that is connoted by that one word, not to be confused with the A-class drug. So yeah, it's and Fairytale of New York, I just think it's a beautiful song that just it just walks that line of sentimentality, sentimentality, nostalgia, culture, loss, grief, and romance. And it happens to be told by a guy who finds himself in a drunk tank in New York, but is out and about to have a kind of a drunken row with his girlfriend, and it's she who uses the word faggot to denigrate him. And just on that particular issue or controversy, I just feel, and I know I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before by anybody else, I just feel it's contextual, it's in the word of a character, it's not expressing a homophobic view by Shane MacGowan. Again, it just feels authentic to the character. You place it in the context of the character and it makes sense. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are a gay person and you hear that song, it makes you flinch or cringe or feel a traumatic recall when that word has come out of another person's mouth in a violent way, in a homophobic way. I can't speak to that experience, and I wouldn't want to dismiss that as a very authentic and very unpleasant experience. I'd like to think we've moved quite far down the road from that kind of language, and I don't think Fairytale of New York is a significant ongoing offence or threat to gay people, and I just think if it's caught up in the sort of the prevailing dynamic of the worst end of woke politics, which is just this hypersensitivity and a sort of a compulsion to take offence at every possible opportunity, and then to wield that power like a flamethrower through a field of cereal. I just distrust that impulse. I distrust it. I think, please keep thinking, keep talking, bring the nuance, bring the examination, bring the balance. So yeah, anyway, Shane MacGowan, I think of him as a great Irish writer, and if there wasn't peace in his lifetime, and connected to that relationship he had with substances and whatnot, If there is some other place for him to be now, I hope he is at peace and doing what he loves without the cost that the human body can exact. Can you hear that? Can you hear that crow in the background? That crow, that rooster. How can you not? Oh man, these chickens are wrecking my head today. Anyway, so from Shane MacGowan to a man whose singing voice I know nothing about, nor his songwriting abilities, but a man who was known for many other things that weren't so frivolous. Henry Kissinger died this week at the age of 100, and I knew very little about Henry Kissinger, to be honest. I'm not a great student of history. I'm generally interested in history, and maybe more so as I age. But Henry Kissinger to me was always this sort of, I always found him like a shady presence in mid-20th century politics. I knew he was a diplomat, but he was to me this figure that was somehow very close to the highest levels of power in the United States, perhaps mostly associated with Richard Nixon, and it was Gerald Ford who came after Nixon. But what I've learned, in the last week since his passing, I've kind of come across more details in his obituaries and more of the sort of the more explicit retellings of how significant a player he was in the architecture of American foreign policy in the sort of post-World War international balance. And for many, he is regarded as a war criminal for the indiscriminate bombings that he sanctioned in Vietnam and in particular in Cambodia. And it made me think of that, maybe it's a bit pithy, but that line, if you kill one person, you're a murderer. If you kill a million, you're a Nobel Peace Laureate. There's a variation of that, isn't there? If you kill a million, you're a world leader. I don't know. I mean, it's a very cynical thing to say. But Kissinger, the quote that I've heard repeated a few times in the last week is his chillingly brutal and succinct line that he sort of, with which he captured his military response or his military strategy regarding Cambodia. And basically it was everything that flies on everything that moves. And if you just think about the implications of that for a second, when America obviously had huge military power, huge military capability, and the idea of just sending planes over Cambodia to, indiscriminately bomb to pieces the people and land of Cambodia. And I think that is probably the thing that most people think of. And of course there are people who go, he was only doing what was necessary. I find myself wondering about this idea that Kissinger was a German who left Germany at the age of 15 and came to the States without a word of English, and found himself in the US military, and he taught himself English and suddenly was a very useful strategic figure at a time when the Americans needed German speakers, and in this kind of post-World War era, when they had a lot of power and had a lot of decision-making power in the sort of restructuring of post-war Germany. And Kissinger, that seemed to be the key entry to the kind of spheres of influence in American political and military life. But what I found myself thinking about was, he was Jewish, he was German, and perhaps American figures of power, presidents and other senior figures in US political administration or military administration, perhaps they felt, if we can get this German Jew who apparently Kissinger had this knack of just reducing kind of geopolitical situations to ultra simplified binaries. Do this and this will happen, do that and that will happen, that's the better choice, that's what you should do, boom. And with that strategy came this extraordinarily sort of aggressive implementation of American foreign policy in countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, later in Chile, in the kind of the Allende regime being overthrown and a military coup being put in place, which led to the rise of Pinochet. That's a movie I haven't seen yet and very much want to. El Conde, the Pablo Larraín movie that's on Netflix. More on that when I get to that in the future. But what I found myself thinking was, that these American figures would have gone, well, if this German Jew is saying it's okay for us to do this, then it must be okay for us to do this. Like, we have the kind of the say-so from a member of the oppressed, a member of the victims of the Holocaust, and he's got a sort of a moral kind of carte blanche, so to speak. And that's just my speculation. Like, I wonder if that was an American, a non-Jewish American giving the green light for those things, would it have had the same reception, is my question. Just a question. I just found myself considering that. And look, that's about all I have to say. Again, I don't know that much about him. You heard me say it earlier, you heard me say it in previous episodes, my kind of fundamental anti-imperialist position would mean I would be on that side that would view Kissinger as a war criminal and not somebody deserving of a peace prize. In fact, was he co-nominated? Was somebody else, was there somebody else who was also awarded the Peace Prize and refused to accept it because Kissinger was being given it too? I think the Peace Prize has history in that area. I mean, again, maybe in the future, if there's someone who brokers peace in the Middle East, and that might be a former combatant or whatever, maybe that person will be deserving of a Peace Prize. So Kissinger, MacGowan, and I did say maybe the connective tissue is the value of human life. And if Kissinger, in a position of great influence, if not outright power in Washington, if he was very much removed from the impact of his advice, of his strategy, of his influence, and didn't have to be on the ground in Cambodia when a bomb was falling from an American plane, maybe that led him to be very callous, disassociated, unaware, unfeeling, and devoid of compassion for the victims of those bombings, and really unable to truly engage with the value of those lives and the death toll. Definitely the death toll was in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So from there, real history, real people. Let's go to the world of the movies to wrap up this episode, and I'll jump to what I think might be one of the most unlikely comedies, and one of the best but most unlikely comedies of the year, and that is David Fincher's The Killer, which was released on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. Did it get a cinema release as well? I think it did. I've watched it about 3 times. I found myself unable not to watch it again almost immediately after I first watched it. And there is just something so darkly, grimly funny about the film, which is basically the story of Michael Fassbender's assassin who blows a hit and suffers some very serious consequences as a result, and then goes on a revenge mission to redress the balance. And it's an incredibly sort of dry and internal, and of course physically, he's a very physical actor, Michael Fassbender. Internal performance by Fassbender, with an ever-present monologue, his voiceover, the narration of the movie. And there's one great, again, depending on your appetite for such things, there's a great fight sequence about midway through the movie. There are at least 3 other executions, deaths, 4, at his hands. And it just moves really well. It's really clean storytelling. It looks really good. But there is this sort of wry, acerbic humour that runs throughout. And there's 2 things. There's one, it's the characters. It's Michael Fassbender's own point of view and his own sort of sarcastic humour, and his own sort of superior aloofness, which has a real current of humour running through it, because there's a humour in the disdain of the superior. Even if their sense of superiority is only in their own head, but the kind of that combination of disdain and contempt, and a witty or pithy put down, I think, can really land in the right place. And he has 1 or 2 of those moments. So that's one of the things that's funny. Now, if you haven't seen it and you don't want the movie spoiled, stop listening and come back in a minute or 2. The other thing that makes it very funny is that throughout the movie he has this sort of like Zen koan, like a Zen mantra, where he's laying out, this is how this is the code of the assassin. This is the code that you live by. This is the code by which you remain focused and removed from human emotion and become totally effective. And it's a very sort of martial art mentality that he's alluding to. But the humour comes in that he is clearly at a moment in his career where he has lost faith in this mantra and is breaking all his own rules. So on first watch, you think he's laying out the mantra. This is the samurai. This is the disciplined soldier, the disciplined instrument, the machine, and this is the rhythm. The mantra is the rhythm of death. And then you watch it again, having thought that the mantra was for our benefit, being invited into his head. But actually, when I watch it again, I was thinking, no, the mantra is for himself. He's trying to convince himself that he's repeating the mantra so much because he no longer feels it, because he's no longer doing it. And, basically that is encapsulated by his failure to successfully complete his hit at the start of the movie, and that just sets the whole thing in motion. So it's this wonderful sort of existential journey, and it's not done with him having a wig out. He never has a moment of, why am I still doing this, or why do I kill people for a living? He never has those moments, but it's all through his action. It's all through his choices. It's all through this path he can't take himself off, which breaks one of his rules. But it's a very tidy movie with individuated sequences, scenes which take place in different locations, and it all ends in a hilarious showdown with the person for whom he was meant to be doing the hit in the first place, played brilliantly and hilariously by Arliss Howard as a sort of aged billionaire boy hipster. And even that is just this great comic note at the very end of the movie. But just Fincher has that. He has that humor in his movies. It is dark. It's dark, it's noirish. He is a master craftsman. He is an auteur, and I just found it a really, really entertaining movie. And probably, on some, the movie that it made me think of was probably Melville's Le Samurai, the Samurai with Alain Delon, which I think is that 60s or 70s. And Alain Delon is the French hitman, all suave and sophisticated. But again, you're going on the journey, following the guy, and in his case, very suave, very slick, but it's all sort of the noirish aspect of Le Samurai is it just feels this isn't going to end well. And sorry, that's another note. That's another comic note of the Fincher movie. Fassbender is the opposite of the suave, super cool assassin from an aesthetic point of view, because in his own words, he dresses like a German tourist because they're the least conspicuous people around, and there's nothing cool about him. And that's another humorous aspect of the whole experience. So I'd recommend that highly. Really well worth checking out. Fassbender continues to be a very interesting actor to watch. There's just this coldness to him, and yet there is an inner machine, and one of the cogs of that machine is definitely humor. It's definitely comedy. It's in the mix. It's a glint in the eye. There's something. He has an ability to sort of undercut himself in a very subtle way. And he's just a very, very nice actor to watch. And a brilliant physical actor as well. So if you like Fassbender and want to spend time with him, you could do much, much worse. And again, some great supporting actors in the movie. Charles Parnell, is that his name? And Tilda Swinton, again, another actor who is always interesting. She never puts in a turn that you don't go, what's going on here? Which brings me to the next movie I want to talk about. I won't spend too long on this one. This is another Netflix movie released around the same time, maybe a week or so earlier. It's called Reptile by Grant Singer. And Reptile is really simply a cop thriller, detective thriller. And, speaking of interesting actors, you think like the rash of the actors who've been populating the big action movies and superhero movies and blockbuster movies of the last 10-15 years. Maybe people like the three Chris's, the Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Pine. Maybe the likes of Ryan Gosling. They're all they all have qualities as performers. They're all kind of good-looking men. They're all kind of quite charming, but on another level, not that interesting maybe. And maybe that's the material, maybe that's the actors. I mean, Gosling of that group is probably in a different category. But it's funny watching Reptile, which has as the central character an amazing performance by Benicio del Toro. And I tell you what, Benicio del Toro is inimitable. He will not be copied. And he has just such natural weight, gravitas, internal stuff. He's just such a great presence on the screen. And it's been a while since I've kind of seen him in something that serves him so well. And let me say right from the off, Reptile is fine. It's not like an amazing movie, but I really, really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. And in a way, it's like another version of Copland. The movie Copland by it was James Mangold, wasn't it? And Stallone and Ray Liotta and Harvey Keitel and De Niro, Peter Berg. So many great actors in that movie. Edie Falco. Who am I thinking of? Kathy Moriarty, was she in it as well? Was it Kathy Moriarty? I might have that one wrong. Anyway, Copland was simply a movie about this, suburb outside New York. That was like a little fiefdom run by the, New York City cops who just went there, and that's where they kind of planned all their corrupt ventures and schemes. And Stallone was the kind of Palooka style local cop who had to kind of keep them in check. Very effective movie, I think. Anyway, this one, Reptile, a cousin of the same movie. And Benicio del Toro is, investigating a local, very brutal murder, and is, the more he kind of uncovers it, the more he's getting a sense of resistance from the cops around him. And he's supported really only by his wife, played very interestingly, I hadn't seen her in a long time, Alicia Silverstone of Clueless fame. And yeah, she just has a really nice quality as his wife. I was like, who is that actress? She's really good. And I was like, oh my God, it's Alicia Silverstone. There was just something really lived in and believable about her portrayal of this kind of cop wife. The wife of a cop, whose uncle was a cop as well. But yeah, a really, really lovely performance by Del Toro. Just going the journey. He takes his time. He's not giving loads away. He's just so in his body. He's just so, his own pace. Really just holds the camera, holds the story, holds every beat. And he's just such an interesting actor to look at and observe. That face, those eyes. And yeah, he's just got that physical presence. And it's a really, I felt just a really nuanced performance by him, with just nice shades of different things. And then this nice supporting cast with Eric Bogosian and Dominic Lombardozzo, is it? Oh my goodness. You'll know who I'm talking about. Herc from The Wire. I'm trying to think who else. Oh, Justin Timberlake, of course. And Michael Pitt, an actor maybe, we'd like to see more of. Michael Pitt, who came to my notice mostly for his role in the first one or two seasons of Boardwalk Empire. Yeah, he's got a quirky little role in that. So yeah, Reptile, if you want a bit of cop drama thriller stuff, you could do a lot worse. Just go on the journey. It's I don't know how much of a mystery it is, but it's just it's vibes. It's vibes and atmosphere and good acting, and sometimes that's enough. That's enough to carry a movie over the line, and I think it very much was in this case. So check that out. Yeah, so what was I going to say? The concluding idea, the value of life. That was something, in the Michael Fassbender role in The Killer. Again, someone who kills people for a living, and gets paid big money for it. Does it without hesitation. Yeah, I mean, what? I'm going to sit here, a middle-aged podcaster in Wicklow, and pontificate and moralise. We should hesitate before we pull the trigger. We should hesitate before we dispatch a human life so easily. But let me remind you, The Killer was fiction, and I think very funny. The life of Henry Kissinger was not. What's happening in the Middle East is not. So make of that what you will. I'll be back next week. With something different. I've no idea what. Stay well, stay safe, and if you want to give me some love, you can do so on social media. I'm there in all the usual places under the clear out. If you like what I do here, don't hesitate to sign up to patreon.com/theclearout, where you can support me with your hard-earned dollars or euros or francs. There's no francs anymore. Or there's francs in Switzerland, surely. Swiss francs in large denominations, please. Okay, take it easy. I'll talk to you soon. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a good time myself, even though the chickens were distracting me. I'll be back soon. All the best. Mind yourselves. Bye.